Professor Dave here. Let's learn about reflexive verbs.
He knows a lot about all kinds of stuff. Professor Dave explains.
An important concept in Italian is that of reflexive verbs, or verbi riflessivi. This word comes from a word in Latin which means bending back, and this derivation is actually quite helpful in understanding what reflexive verbs do. They bend back towards the subject. This is done with the help of things called reflexive pronouns. To put this into context, let's recall how transitive verbs transfer action from the subject to the object. Giacomo compra le verdure e le lava. The subject is Giacomo, but the vegetables receive the action as they are purchased and washed. In this way, reflexive verbs are not too different from transitive verbs, except that with these, the subject and the object will coincide. Let's do this to the previous example. Giacomo si sveglia e si lava. Now Giacomo is not washing vegetables, he is washing himself. And in such a case, we use a different pronoun, the pronoun si. This pronoun is always found in the infinitive form of reflexive verbs, which makes their identification very easy. For infinitives that end in are, ere, or ire, we get arsi, like with alzarsi, ersi, like with radersi, and irsi, like with vestirsi. However, if we are to conjugate these verbs, we must use the special reflexive pronouns in front of the verb. These look more or less just like the direct object pronouns, except for the third person, which will be the new one we just learned. Let's do the full conjugation of the three verbs we already mentioned. For alzarsi, a first conjugation verb, we can have io mi alzo, tu ti alzi, lei si alza, noi ci alziamo, voi vi alzate, loro si alzano. Now for radersi, a second conjugation verb. Io mi rado, tu ti radi, lui si rade, noi ci radiamo, voi vi radete, loro si radono. And lastly, for vestirsi, which belongs to the third conjugation, io mi vesto, tu ti vesti, lei si veste, noi ci vestiamo, voi vi vestite, loro si vestono. Now, you may recognize why the most important part will be to familiarize yourself with the list of reflexive verbs so that you will never forget to add these pronouns. As we go over this list, we should note that some of these verbs have English translations that don't always include words like myself and yourself. So these are sometimes challenging to remember to categorize as reflexive. A large number of these verbs are in the first conjugation and therefore easy to conjugate, and here they are. Abituarsi, ammalarsi, addormentarsi, arrabbiarsi, lamentarsi, fermarsi, fidarsi, svegliarsi, annoiarsi, pettinarsi, riposarsi, scusarsi, innamorarsi, truccarsi, sbagliarsi, accontentarsi, vergognarsi, sbrigarsi, farsi male. Now a few in the second conjugation. Mettersi, sedersi, nascondersi, perdersi, rompersi, sorprendersi, accorgersi, commuoversi, decidersi. And just a couple in the third conjugation. Pulirsi, sentirsi, pentirsi, divertirsi, trasferirsi, vestirsi. Let's try a few of these in some sentences with their conjugated forms. D'inverno ci alziamo presto. Perché non vi pettinate? Loredana si alza sempre tardi la mattina. When using these in the past tense, remember that reflexive verbs always use the auxiliary essere, and consequently, the past participle must agree with the subject. Vi siete svegliati troppo tardi. Ci siamo divertiti un sacco. Francesca si è innamorata di un dottore. We should note that regarding the position of the reflexive pronouns, the same rules apply as for the direct object. When the reflexive verb is in the infinitive, the pronoun must follow. Bisogna alzarsi presto la mattina. When reflexive verbs are used in the infinitive with the modal verbs potere, volere, and dovere, the pronoun can precede the modal or follow enclitically. Non mi voglio alzare, or non voglio alzarmi. Both are valid. When reflexive verbs are used in imperative form, the pronouns will always follow as usual. Massimo, alzati e lavati, è tardi. Now that we know how to use reflexive verbs, let's check comprehension. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.